was an interesting culture when it came to athletics in my hometown. We just simply weren't very good at really anything when I was in high school. My freshman year of high school, our varsity girls basketball team lost a game one night, 112-8. I didn't say we. I'm not going to associate with that. They didn't score in the first half of the entire game. And the 8 points they did score were all free throws. They literally didn't have a field goal in an entire basketball game. Now, to be fair, the team that beat them was the eventual state champion. They actually won state 3 years out of the next 4. And so, but what's interesting is that year, the starting 5 of that team from Ozona, Texas. If you've ever driven down I-10, you've driven through the little town called Ozona. And when we played them, they had 5 girls on their team, and 4 of the 5 were freshmen. The other one was a sophomore, and they won state that year. And they destroyed our girls' basketball team. And that was really just kind of the culture of not just basketball, but all sports. When I was a senior in high school, our football team, we won 1 game. And it was against a junior varsity team from a larger school near El Paso. We won 12-7. We scored 2 touchdowns but missed both extra points. I mean, we were bad. We just did not really know how to win. When I was my senior year, basketball, we played the number 2 team in the state, the Stanton Buffaloes. Now, I was one of the tallest ones on my high school varsity basketball team. And so I played post, which that's a problem because I'm not really that tall. At 6 foot, I was playing post on a varsity basketball team, and we played the number 2 team in the state. Here's what's crazy. They had a guy that was 6'8". They had 2 guys, twins, that were 6'6". They had another guy that was 6'4", who was just a big mountain of a man. He played football. He wasn't a basketball player, but man, he was just a bruiser down low. That's the guy I had to guard. That didn't go well. I weighed about 145 pounds at the time, 6 foot. And then they had this guy that was 5'9". He was their point guard, and he could dunk with both hands. We were outmatched. But here's what's crazy. Going into the last minute of the game, we were up by 10 points. And we still lost. That 5'9" point guard, his name was Kyle Herm. He ended up going to play football at Rice. He was an option quarterback at Rice. He hit 3 3-pointers in the final minute of the game, and then they hit some free throws that pulled them ahead, and we lost. And here's why I tell you that, because it was almost like we were in this mindset of losing. It's like we didn't know how to win. I remember in baseball season, our coaches would say, you guys got to learn how to win, because we were terrible, because it was a small school. So if you played a sport, you played all sports, because in order to have a team, everybody had to play. And so he's like, we got destroyed in football, we got destroyed in basketball, and we're actually decent at baseball, but we don't know how to win. There was this culture of losing. There was this mindset of losing. The difference about baseball, there were only 2 teams in the district that played baseball, so you were guaranteed a spot in the playoffs. But we always lost every time in the first round of the playoffs because we didn't know how to win. And the reason I set up our time tonight with that is because I think there's a tendency for some of us, maybe all of us, to find ourselves in a similar place in our life where we feel like we're not winning. We feel like we're kind of stuck in this place. We're stuck in this mindset that this is just the way it's going to be. This is all that life has to offer me. There's not the same potential for my life that I feel like I see in the life of everybody around me. And this is just kind of where I'm stuck. And what begins to happen is that mindset begins to lead everything that you do in your life. And you never get to a place where you feel like you're experiencing everything that life should be. And so over the next few weeks, I want us to talk about that. I want us to look into what God's word says, and we're going to focus on this kind of mindset of running, because every single one of us were born to run, and you see that in Scripture with the way that Paul talks about living life. He talks about living life like running a race, not a sprint, but a marathon. So we're going to look at some of this, and we're going to begin to understand and unpack some of this as we jump in. And tonight, what I want us to do is I want us to look at a story back in the Old Testament about a man named Manasseh with this idea of what do I need to do if I'm in a place like Wes just described, where I feel kind of stuck in this mindset of I just don't have what it takes to win. I just don't have the ability. That potential's there for everybody else, but I don't feel like it's there for me. So how do I get back on my feet? That's really the title of the message tonight is back on your feet. If we're born to run, then what do I do if I can't run? What do I do if I feel like I've never been able to run? Well, we got to get back on our feet. Before we can run, we got to stand. And so I want to look at the story about Manasseh, and I'm going to turn my phone, not my phone, but my watch off because it keeps buzzing on my wrist. And it's distracting me, which is going to distract you, and that's going to be a problem. So there we go. Somebody in here is probably sending me text messages like, you're doing it on purpose. You're like, watch this. You see my phone, my watch keep going off. That's all good. But here's what I want to do. I want to look at this story, and we see the story of Manasseh, this guy who ultimately is running from God. We're going to see that. But he finally finds himself in a place where he has run from God so far and so long that he finds himself in a place where he is stuck and he can't run anymore at all. And it's in that moment that we see three things happen really quickly. We see that he remembers the goodness of God. We see that he begins to respond with humility to the pursuit of God. And I'm going to unpack this for us. And then you see God rescue and restore him. And he brings him back. So let's pick up what this says. I'm reading from 2 Chronicles 33, starting in verse 1. I encourage you, maybe you're somewhat new to church story, I want to encourage you to grab a hard copy of the Bible. If you don't have one, we can help you get one. We've got some we'll give you, but there's something valuable about having God's word in front of us, being able to mark it up and write in it and do all the things. So we make a big deal about that because I think it's important for us. And so if you don't have that, it's on the screens and there's no judgment. But let's look at what it says in verse 1. It says, Manasseh was 12 years old when he became king, and he reigned for 55 years in Jerusalem. Now I have a 12-year-old boy, and the thought of him being king of anything is scary. Now, he would love that. I mean, he would love that idea. But here's what I want us to understand. Manasseh is the son of King Hezekiah. And aside from King David in the Old Testament, King Hezekiah was probably the next most well-known godly ruler of the Israelites. He was someone who he honored God, he trusted God, he lived a life of faith. And so Manasseh had grown up under the parenting guidance of King Hezekiah. So he had an understanding of God. He knew something about God. He had probably participated in worship to God and maybe been familiar with a lot of the things of God. And so we find out that he becomes king when he is 12 years old. Most likely the reason he became king is because King Hezekiah had passed away. So as a 12-year-old boy, he loses his father and he becomes king. Now, I can't even begin to wrap my mind around what that must feel like, but let's continue on. It says in verse 2, he did evil in the sight of the Lord according to the abominations of the nations, whom the Lord disposed before the sons of Israel. So we already see this rapid running away from God in verse 2. We find out that he becomes king, and he begins to run after all the things going on around him. He's looking at the cultures of the people groups that were in this area before the Israelites actually got there, and he's watching what they do, and he's beginning to run. He's attracted to those things. He's attracted by the culture and the lifestyle of those that he's looking after. Instead of running towards God, he's running away from God, following the flow of the culture. Verse 3 says, for he rebuilt the high places which his father Hezekiah had torn down. He also set up altars for the Baals and made Asherim. And he worshiped all the heavenly lights and served them. So he's not running towards God. He's running away. He's looking at the culture around him. And as he's running, one of the things he begins to do is he begins to worship the things that were never supposed to be worshiped. He begins to worship the created things of the earth. Things that were never designed by God for us to worship or to be objects of worship. He's worshiping these idols. He's building up these idols. And he's on this rapid, relentless pace running from God. It continues in verse 4. He says, he built altars in the house of the Lord, of which the Lord had said, my name shall be in Jerusalem forever. So God said, my name will always be in Jerusalem. And Manasseh's like, yeah, but I want to add some other names. So I'm going to put some other names because I think some other names probably deserve to be in here. He built altars for all the heavenly lights in the two courtyards of the house of the Lord. He also made his sons pass through the fire in the valley of Ben Hinnom. And he practiced witchcraft, used divination, practiced sorcery, and dealt with mediums and spirits. He did much evil in the sight of the Lord, provoking him to anger. Now, can we just pause right here? Because it's real easy to probably skip over what's going on in this passage, but when you're throwing your children in a fire, can we just all agree that there's a problem? I mean, I have to imagine that Manasseh, when he was 12 years old, if he had been asked, hey, Manasseh, what do you want your life to look like 10, 15, 20, 25 years from now? I'm pretty confident he would not say, I really want my life to be in a place where I feel like the right thing to do is to throw my kids in the fire. I'm pretty confident he's probably not saying that. But why is he doing that? Well, he's doing that because he feels like in order to earn favor from these false objects of worship, he needs to sacrifice his children. So he's giving up his children in order to earn favor from objects that were never meant to be objects of divinity. And you think, man, that's whack. That's messed up. I can't believe he would do that. But hang on a second, because I think it's important for us to see this. The moment we begin to run away from God, the moment we begin to live for ourselves, the moment we begin to follow the culture around us, the moment that we begin to raise certain things in our lives, material things, relationships, homes, whatever it is, our careers, our education, whatever it is, we begin to raise those up to a place where they were never supposed to be, and we begin to worship those things. We begin to make those things the ultimate thing in our life. Then we'll eventually find ourselves in a place where we're willing to sacrifice those closest to us in order to earn favor from those that we think we need to be earning favor from. Parents, let me press on this a little bit more. We have to be careful, because what we can often do, and sometimes with good intentions, is we can begin to sacrifice our children on the altar of success, on the altar of being better networked in the business community that I need to be committed to and connected to so that I can begin to find more success in those connections. Or we begin to sacrifice them on the altar of not our success, but of their athletic success. Because if they can be the best baseball player, the best football player, the best basketball player, the best cheerleader, the best dancer, if they can be that, then they'll have the life that they always wanted. They'll have the life that I never had. And so I'm going to sacrifice everything in their order to help them find the favor in that. But what we're doing is we're actually taking life from them. And it happens the moment we begin to run from God. The moment you and I begin to run from God, we begin to see those closest to us feel the negative consequences and live out some of the negative consequences because of our running away from God. You see this happening in Manasseh's life. Verse 7 says, "Then he put the carved image of the idol which he'd made in the house of God, of which God had said to David and his son Solomon," listen, this is what God said. God says, "In this house and in Jerusalem, which I have chosen from all the tribes of Israel, I will put my name forever." Like, this is God speaking to his people. This is a bold statement. This is an important statement. Then look what he says. "And I will not remove the foot of Israel again from the land which I have appointed for your fathers, if only they will take care to do everything that I have commanded them according to the law, the statutes, and the ordinances given through Moses." So look what Manasseh does. So Manasseh encouraged Judah and the inhabitants of Jerusalem to do more evil than the nations whom the Lord destroyed before the sons of Israel. In Manasseh's continual running away from God, he has completely dismissed anything of God. He's dismissed the things that God has commanded his people to do. He's dismissed the importance of worshiping God, the importance of understanding the things that God has called them to live in a specific way. He said, you know what? We don't need that. In fact, not only do we not need that, but we're going to do whatever we want to do. And whatever we want to do is going to be the right thing to do. He's running. And then in verse 10, "So the Lord spoke to Manasseh and his people, but they paid no attention." This is really a heartbreaking story. Manasseh's just crazy, whacked out, running away from God, and you see the continual spiral of this. And he gets to a place where he's not even willing to listen to God's voice. Now, we just had his whole kind of rap sheet thrown out in front of us, and I kind of feel bad for Manasseh. It's like he gets his name written in the Bible, and we get to hear about all the things that he did that were not honoring. And I don't know about you, but when I think about my own life, if that was to happen to me, I would feel really uncomfortable. Like if I walked around this week and you didn't know I was there, and I recorded on video every moment of the past week in your life, like, does that make your armpits a little sweaty? Does that make you nervous? Because there was that one guy that cut you off in traffic and you decided to tell them that they were number one, and you yelled some things to them that you probably wouldn't yell at them in church, or maybe you would, I don't know, maybe we're that kind of a church. Or maybe Maybe there's some conflict, and you know that conflict is there, and maybe it's conflict with some of the people closest to you, and you know it's there, but you're not willing to take the steps necessary to reconcile and to work through some forgiveness and to restore that relationship, and so you just kind of become this grumpy person to be around. And listen, I'm not casting stones. I want us to see ourselves in this story. You know, one of the questions we just finished a teaching series called Asking for a Friend, and we were walking through a lot of different questions that you sent in, and one of the questions that was sent in that we didn't get a chance to answer was, is it wrong to cuss? Is cussing a sin? Well, I hope not. Not because I cuss or have ever cussed, but because I know people who have. And that's a little bit ridiculous, but here's the thing. This is what's interesting. I think that it really comes down to a matter of the heart. But it's always interesting. I grew up in a culture, and I had a Sunday school teacher when I was in high school who would tell me that cussing was any thought or any word that was unnecessary, that was adding emphasis to a negative situation. So I couldn't say, dang it. I couldn't say darn. I couldn't say any of those things because she considered it cussing. She said, it's coming from a dirty place in your heart. And I'm like, well, I got a lot of dirty places in my heart then. What was crazy is she got really hung up on this one issue of specific words that were coming out of my mouth. She says, God says, one of the 10 Commandments, thou shalt not use the Lord's name in vain. I was like, I didn't use the Lord's name in vain. And even if I did, I think God can handle his name being said in a way that maybe he doesn't prefer. Like, I think it's maybe more important than that. I think actually what the fourth commandment is talking about is not putting God's name on something that God didn't lead you to do. But that's a whole nother sermon for a whole nother day. My point is I think sometimes we can find ourselves in a place where maybe even this week, where you're like some others that maybe in the room, and where I have found myself in my own life at times, where I begin to judge people because of a word that might come out of their mouth. But yet, I will run for hours talking smack about somebody who's not there to represent themselves. Man, I think gossip can be so much more destructive than one potential word that slips out of my mouth in a moment of frustration. But just think about what is that in your life? Maybe it's insecurity or instability in finances that's leading you to this place where maybe you've started running down this path of cutting corners and cheating the system because you want more financial stability, but it's at the cost of your integrity. And you slowly start to run away from some of the things that you know God wouldn't be leading you to do. Or maybe it's the insecurity in the way that you look or the way that you appear, and you begin to do things to your body to try to make yourself feel better. But what you're doing is you're really just causing harm to your body, because there's never this place you're going to get to where you're going to feel like you're everything that you need to be. And you start running down this path, and it's exhausting. Imagine being exposed. Imagine us playing a video of your week. We're not playing a video of my week. I'm just going to go ahead and throw that out there. You're like, well, Wes, you're not a pastor anymore. You're like, Wes, what have you been doing all week? Listen, I'm being a little bit ridiculous, but I'm also not perfect. I'm just like you. I have faults, make mistakes, say things I probably shouldn't say, do things I probably shouldn't do. But what I want us to see is that it can become a dangerous cycle in our lives. And what we ultimately do is every single one of us, we have this natural tendency to run from God, this natural tendency to want to control everything ourselves, trusting that we can take care of it. And it's exactly what gets Manasseh into the place that he's in. Listen, you can have control or you can have faith, but you can't have both. And Manasseh is in a place where he says, you know what? I'm going to control this situation. And he begins to run from God. I think there's two reasons people run from God. One is there's just this slow drift. It's not this intentional decision that you make in a moment where you say, you know what, I'm going to run from God today. And tomorrow, and the next day, and next week, and next month, I'm running from God. That's what I'm going to do. It's not a decision to do that. It's just a slow, gradual drift. I mean, ask yourself this question. When it comes to you and your relationship with God, were you closer to God at some point in your past than you are today? And I'm not asking you that question to make you feel guilty, but to just reflect and consider, if you're not, who moved? You see, God doesn't leave us. He doesn't forsake us, but we can slowly begin to drift. Our position, where we place ourselves, is more important than our intention. You know, one of the funny things in my house is my family hides cookies from me because I like cookies. I like cookies a lot. I like sugar. I have a problem. I have a serious problem when it comes to sweets. And I discovered a couple years ago, my boys and my wife having conversation that I couldn't hear well, and I finally realized they were hiding cookies, and they were mad because I found the stash of cookies, and I was eating them. And they were so bummed because I was eating the cookies at such a fast pace. I was laughing with Birdie and Taylor a couple weeks ago because my son bought a 2-pound bag of Swedish fish, which is never a good idea for a 12-year-old or for a 42-year-old. But that bag was in our pantry, and I'm like trying to, get healthy and trying to take care of myself, but I know that bag's in there. And I'm too weak to withstand the temptation of the Swedish fish in my pantry. And so all throughout the day, I'm walking through there, just grazing on the Swedish fish. Cam came home. I said, hey, Cam, I got a confession to make. I ate all your Swedish fish. He's like, are you kidding me? You ate all my... I was like, don't worry about it. I bought you another bag. We're good. But here's my point. The problem is I continue to put myself in a place, in a position to fall into that, even though my intention was to not continue to eat the sweets and to continue to be unhealthy. And so what begins to happen is my life begins to look like the small decisions that I choose not to make. We begin to run this race further and further away from God. And you see this in the life of Manasseh. But for some, it's the slow drift, but others it could be, and I think maybe this is what's going on in Manasseh's life. It's not the slow drift, there's a tragedy, an unexpected tragedy that happens in Manasseh's life that he struggles to deal with. For years I knew the story, I had even taught the story, and I don't think I'd ever considered this, but I wonder if this is where Manasseh found himself. He found himself in a place of frustration, anger towards God. Because as a 12-year-old, he loses his father. And he doesn't understand that. And he knew that his father had a relationship with God. He had watched his dad worship God. Manasseh knew things about God. Hezekiah had probably taught him things about God. He had participated in those things. He knew all of these things about God, but I'm not sure that Manasseh personally knew God. You see, God doesn't have grandchildren. He has sons and daughters. The faith of your parents cannot be your faith. But I wonder if he had this understanding of who God was, and then once life didn't go as he expected it to go, he said, you know what, I don't know that I want to have anything to do with that kind of a God. Why would he let that happen to me? And so he begins to run this crash course, living life the way that he wants to live life, running from God. But the longer we fail to trust God, the more likely we'll find ourselves in a place doing things we said we would never do. I don't think Manasseh ever envisioned his life looking like it looked, throwing his children in a fire. Not only running from God, but leading others to run from God. It was a destructive place. But here's what's amazing. In all of that, in all of the dysfunction and destruction that Manasseh has participated in and has instigated, did you see what God did in verse 10? Because God is relentlessly continuing to pursue Manasseh. He wants to bring him home. He wants to restore things. There's still potential for Manasseh's life. I look at Manasseh's life and I'm like, bro, you're done. Like there's no hope for you. Like God's got more important people to worry about than you because you've completely gone off the rails. But verse 10 tells us that, so the Lord spoke to Manasseh and his people, but they paid no attention. So he's still continuing to pursue Manasseh. That's important for us to recognize. It says that they paid no attention. Listen, when we decide to live outside of the presence of God, then we forfeit the protection of God. Why do I say that? Well, let's look at verse 11. Therefore, the Lord brought the commanders of the army of the king of Assyria against them. And they captured Manasseh with hooks, bound him with bronze chains, and led him to Babylon. What's the result of running from God? I think we see it in Manasseh's life. He finds himself in a foreign place, led away to captivity by the one he was looking to be like He was looking to the Assyrians and the way that the Assyrians worshiped, the gods that the Assyrians looked to. That's what he was running towards. And then, ironically, he finds himself in captivity to the ones that he was chasing. Listen, as we begin to run from God, we'll begin to run after things that will eventually enslave us. We'll become imprisoned too. Not only just are we in prison, but he's taken away with hooks, bound him with bronze chains. Listen, that's a piercing that nobody wants. You don't want a hook through your nose pulling you away to a foreign land. Not only is it pulling away to a foreign land, but now he's found himself surrounded by people who don't care about him, who don't want anything good for him. Isolated from those closest to him, isolated from the family relationships, from all the ones that genuinely cared about him. He finds himself in a place of isolation, imprisoned, all a result of him running from God. But notice what happens. When he was in distress, he appeased the Lord his God. That's important for us to just stop and pay attention to. When he was in distress, he appeased the Lord his God. So what does he do? Maybe you're in this place where you, like Manasseh, maybe not quite as extreme when you consider your story versus Manasseh's story, but you find yourself in a place where maybe you've been running from God, and you are in a place currently where you look around and those that were once closest to you, that genuinely cared about you, now they've been distanced from you. Maybe you created that distance, maybe they created that distance, but whatever reason, you have found yourself in a place lost and kind of pushed away from those that once cared so deeply for you and your family, your closest relationships. You found yourself enslaved, imprisoned by the things that you have run after for so long. And I'm not saying any of this to make you feel bad about yourself. I want us to see ourselves, because as we can see our situation clearly, then we can clearly begin to make steps towards restoring what's been broken. And you see this in Manasseh's life. The first thing he does is he remembers God's goodness. I think it's in this moment, in his distress, as he's hit rock bottom, he thinks to himself, I wonder what my dad would say. My dad worshiped God. My dad loved God. I wonder if maybe this God is something worth pursuing. I wonder if this God is one that I really probably should run towards. Sometimes I think one of the most gracious things God could do is let us to continue to run from him. Because until we run far enough from him, or we begin to experience the consequences of our running, we'll never truly understand how gracious and how merciful he really is towards his children. I wonder if Manasseh begins to feel that. This word appeased is the word in the Hebrew called halah. It's to be literally sick. So in his distress, he's literally feeling sick to himself. Maybe think about a Justin Bieber song, which is always dangerous. But in January of 2014, Justin Bieber was arrested on a DUI with an invalid license because he was drag racing in Florida. And then in July of 2017, he canceled the rest of his world tour because he was dealing with depression and anxiety. He was in a really, really bad, dark place in his life. Then in 2020, he released a song called Lonely. There's an interesting part in this song that I think maybe is a little bit of what's going on in Manasseh's life, and maybe something that you can relate to because you've been in this place or you are in this place. He says, as he's reflecting on the price that you pay for child stardom, Justin Bieber writes, "Everybody saw me sick, and it felt like no one gave a blank." I'll let you fill in the blank because I don't cuss. "They criticized the things I did as an idiot kid." Now he's speaking this out from the darkest, most lonely place that he experienced in his life up to that point. And it was in this same kind of distress that I think Manasseh is appeasing to the Lord's God. He is calling out. He is looking to God. And then it goes on to say, and he humbled himself greatly before the God of his fathers. Now that word humbled, if you're taking notes or highlighting, underline that word humbled. So I think it's important for us to see what he's doing as he's remembering the goodness of God. He also responds with humility to God's pursuit. And I almost just left that at responds with humility, but I think it's important for us to remember. It wasn't just Manasseh running back toward God or looking back toward God. God was there the whole time because his pursuit for you, for Manasseh, for me, it's relentless. He is continually running after us. And he begins to see this, and he begins to recognize it. And he finds himself in the worst place that he ever thought he would be, living in the unexpected consequences of his own actions, his own choices. It says that he humbled himself greatly before the God of his ancestors. Humility always precedes healing. And you and I can so oftentimes try to control it all ourselves and fix everything ourselves before we think that we're able to connect with God or to call out to God, to pray to God. We've got to clean ourselves up first. And it's like, no. All we simply need to do is just say, I don't have the ability to do this. It's like I said a minute ago. You can have control or you can have faith, but you can't have both. So what it looks like is he responds with humility. He's saying, I can't do this. I can't win this battle on my own. I've tried, and this is where it's gotten me. No one has caused more heartache for me than me, trying to control some areas of my life that I really have no business trying to control. I think the same is what is being said and what we're seeing in Manasseh's life. Verse 13, the last verse says, when he prayed to him, he was moved by him and heard his pleading. And he brought him back to Jerusalem, to his kingdom. Then Manasseh knew that the Lord alone is God. So Manasseh, he remembers the goodness of God. As he remembers and reflects on the goodness of God that he had learned and understood as a boy, as a child, he begins to respond to it with humility. He begins to call out to God. It says that he prayed to God. He called out to him. And what is God's response? It's not, hey, Manasseh, listen, I'm going to have to go back and I'm going to have to talk to angels about this because I just don't know, man. You've gone too far. No, it says there's no time. It just says that God was moved by him. It means that there was a compassion that stirred up in God's mind and his heart for Manasseh, for his son. He said, I feel compassion towards you. And his compassion led him on this relentless pursuit. And what does he do? He rescues him from where he is, and he takes him back to where he was supposed to be. He restores him, not just to Jerusalem, but if you continue to read the story, you quickly recognize that he still has authority in Jerusalem when he gets back, because he begins to make some moves. He begins to lead differently. So not only did he just take him from one place and lead him to another place, he takes him from one place, he takes him, he returns him back to where he belongs, but he also returns him back to who he was. And he has the same authority. But this time, his focus is not on leading people away and running from God. It's running towards God and leading other people towards God. You see that as you continue through the story. So as he does this, God's response rescues and restores Manasseh. It's a fascinating story, but Manasseh was in a place where he was helpless. There was nothing he could do on his own. I think sometimes we struggle with really trusting that God has something better for us than what we have found for ourselves. But I truly believe, as I continue to read through Scripture and I continue to understand it more every single time I read it, I truly believe that God wants greater things than we want for ourselves. He wants something for us that we all want, but we haven't been able to quite experience it because we've never really fully given all that we are and placed it in his hands and said, God, I trust you. I'm giving up control, not just of some things, but everything. I'm trusting you with it. What does it look like to run? It looks like giving up control. What if the enemy of the life you want is the life you're living? Think about that. What if the enemy of all that you hoped life would be is the life you're actually living? As you consider that, then what's the next step? I'll close with this. I've talked a little bit about my love for fishing, and I talked about this several weeks ago, but probably 7 years ago maybe, I was learning how to fish, and I had a friend of mine who said, hey, I've got a boat. You want a boat? And I was like, heck yeah, I want a boat, but there's no way I can have a boat. And he said, no, I'll make you a deal. I was like, oh, okay, I'm listening. He's like, I'll sell you. It was an old school center console fishing boat, and he sold it to me for $2,000. I said, man, I'll figure out a way to come up with $2,000. So I got this boat, and then I was like, oh man, I'm about to take my fishing game to the next level. And so I went out, started fishing, and I'd take a couple people with me, but I didn't take people with me that knew what they were doing because I didn't want them to judge me. I didn't want to be embarrassed by that. And so I'd go out and we would fish all day long, and we'd come home with no fish. Every time I'd walk in the house, Brandy and the boys would be like, "What'd you catch?" And I'd be like, nothing. And literally for like an entire year, every time I would go fishing in this boat, I wouldn't catch fish. It was discouraging. It was embarrassing. I was frustrated. And so I came up with a plan. I said, you know what? I'm going to start researching this. And so I did. I started researching. I started looking for maps. I started looking for different things that would maybe show me where the fish are. And so I bought this map, and I fished in Matagorda. And so I bought this map of Matagorda. And I was like, all right, now I'm going to find the fish because there's fish on this map. I just need to go to those fish. The problem is, if you've ever been out on a bay system like Matagorda or Galveston, it's not like a lake. There's all kinds of stuff under the water. There's shell reefs, there's sandbars, and so you can't just like go cruising thinking, oh, we're going to get to those fish, because you're probably going to run into something that you didn't realize was just below the surface of the water, and you're going to wreck your boat. And so I was like, man, the fish are there, but I'm not sure I can get there. And it just began to add more frustration, more embarrassment, more shame. People are like, you like to fish? No, I don't like to fish. You ever go fishing? No, I don't go fishing, but I went fishing all the time. But I couldn't catch fish. It was frustrating. I was like, this is supposed to be better. Like, this is supposed to be fun. People do this for fun, and this isn't fun. And then I had a friend one day who's a fishing guide. And he said, hey, why don't you follow me sometime? Get your boat, bring your boat. We'll both launch, and you can just follow me, and I'll show you how to get to some places. And then you can put the tracks on your GPS system, and then down the road, you can go do your own thing. I was like, man, that sounds awesome. You'll really do that? Yeah, I'll do that. Awesome. All right, cool. So we go, and we get out on the water. And he said, just follow me. I said, game on. So I started following him, and we went to all these different spots. You know what? We caught fish that day. But you know what else was fascinating about that day? I wasn't stressed that day. I wasn't worried about what I was going to hit under the water. I wasn't discouraged because I couldn't get from this place to the place that I thought I needed to be, because I had someone to follow me. I had a guide. And the reason I tell you that story is because I think sometimes we get into this place in our life where we're trying to control it. And we think, you know what, I've got this idea. This idea is going to help me get to where I want to go. And then that idea doesn't work, and so we find another idea. And we think, that's what I need to do. That's what's going to make life work the way that I want it to work. Keep buying maps. Keep looking at GPS systems. But we don't need a map. We need a guide. We need a guide to show us. We need someone to follow. The story of Manasseh is the story of the gospel, because every single one of us find ourselves in a natural state of running from God, and God knew this. He said, keep all the commandments. He knew they couldn't keep all the commandments, but he said that so that they would recognize their need for a Savior, their need for Jesus, and then he sent Jesus so that we didn't have to stay in our natural state of running from God to find ourselves at rock bottom with no hope and no way out. So he sent a guide. But he didn't require that you follow him. He gives you a choice. He gives you a choice to follow. It wouldn't be right for him to demand it. There's no love in that. But his love was so big that he gave you a way out. Even when we looked back at him and said, God, I don't need you. I can control this myself. So I don't know where that lands for you, but I wonder if there may be someone here tonight that you're in a place where you've tried to control it for way too long, and you have found yourself in a place in life that you never thought you'd be, and you feel stuck. You feel like there's no way out. Listen, there's a way out, and his name is Jesus. And it sounds crazy. It sounds scary. It sounds illogical. But it's right, and it's good, and it's rich, and it's life-giving. But you have to trust him. You have to follow him. You close your eyes.